Good evening. Welcome to another episode of Aging with Attitude. My name is Phil Koch, the host for this evening's episode. Tonight we have Julia Sain, who is the Executive Director of Disabilities Rights and Resources, based here in Charlotte, correct?
Right. We cover Mecklenburg, Union, Gaston, and Cabarrus counties.
Wow. That's a big office.
And, it's a lot of work and a lot of people who can use our help.
Wow, that's great. Well, first of all, thank you for being on the show. But also, why don't we start off and kickstart the show by give us a little of a definition of what disabilities are.
Oh, okay. Well, disability is not the same as being disabled. I want to get that out there.
Okay.
The goal of our agency, the overall mission of the agency, is for people with limitations to a significant life activity can be integrated in the community to the extent that they want to. So people with and without disabilities being able to transportation together, church together, stores together, live together, that kind of thing.
Right.
And I'm glad you asked me about the definition of disability, because that's one of the things that comes up a lot when I talk to the folks who are watching your show, the folks that are interested in aging issues, because there's a lot of different definitions of disability. If you're talking about Social Security disability, if you're talking about the VA, those are different definitions of disability, so it's confusing. The reason that Social Security and the VA have a certain definition is because there's money attached to it. And so you can't be all or nothing. You have to have a sliding scale, so to speak. But when you're talking about the general federal definition of disability, it's much simpler than that.
Okay.
It's any functional limitation, whether it's mental or physical, to create difficulty for you to perform life functions.
Right.
And you either have it or you don't. There's no 10% or 20%, because the point of our agency is working with a person who has that limitation. That limitation is going to prevent you from being as independent as you want to be. And we can assist in the next step, removing some of the barriers that you face to living as independently as you choose to live. That's the whole point. We never say to live as independently as possible, because that's not our call.
Right.
It is what is it that's keeping you from being as independent as you want to be? And if what's keeping you from being as independent as you want to be is a limitation that you now have, mentally or physically, and what can we do to help you break those barriers so that you can move on to the next step?
Okay.
Now, there's laws. The point of it is that if you acknowledge that you have a disability, in that broad definition, a limitation that prevents you from doing what you want to do, then there's some protections in the law. So you have the Americans with Disabilities Act. You have Air Carriers Access Act. That's the one about when you can and can't fly with your pet turkey or whatever. And then there's the Fair Housing Act. So the Americans with Disabilities Act doesn't cover all of that, because the other laws cover that. There's some stuff about if you're in school and you're a student with a disability, that's a different law. And it's so confusing, which is one of the reasons I have job security, I guess, because I keep up with all this stuff. But what is it about your limitation that is preventing you from being as independent as you choose to be? And I will know, and my staff will know, are there laws that we can use to talk to your apartment manager for helping you find a parking place, get a parking place? Or if you use sign language and the doctor won't hire an interpreter, or any of those kinds of things that are preventing you from being independent, call us up, let us talk with you, let us help you, let us advocate with you, so that then you can move on to the next step.
Right. So what kind of calls do you get? I mean, what's a more common type of call that you would get in your office?
I'm really glad you asked. There are so many. First of all, I will say that I'm a columnist for All About Seniors.
Yeah.
It's a magazine that comes out once a quarter, and I have a column in there called Ask Ada, ADA. I made that up. That's kind of silly. But
No, it's good.
because there are folks who think that the Americans with Disabilities Act, which is one of my areas of expertise, doesn't pertain to just seniors. And I say all the time that there is an Older Americans Act that says that you can't be denied something based upon your age. That's not the Americans with Disabilities Act. Ours is about function. The Americans with Disabilities Act is about function. And so what is it that you can't do, and what do you need the help with? And it could be in employment, or it could be in government programs, or getting into a store, or getting into your favorite barbecue place, or whatever the thing is. So it's always good when somebody calls and asks us what the law says, because sometimes people make assumptions that aren't right. One of the calls I get a lot has to do with personal devices. Let me explain that. If you go into a grocery store, for example, or some of the box stores, they may have carts with wheelchairs, or they may have wheelchairs. And that's convenient, that's nice, but it's not required by law.
Okay.
So I'll get calls, especially this time of year, or during the holidays particularly, when somebody will say, well, I went into such and such store or a mall and they didn't have the wheelchair. And I think that's discrimination. And I say, no, the law says that's a personal device. They don't have to have a cadre of wheelchairs. They don't have to have a basket of hearing aids.
Right.
They don't have to have a closet full of artificial legs. In the law, all of that is considered personal devices. So places that do are doing it as a courtesy, but it is not discrimination if that doesn't exist. To go just a step further from that, I also get calls, particularly in this day and age when you have, say that you have a woman who has a disability and her husband is her primary caregiver, and it may not be even that she uses a wheelchair, but assistance and so forth. And then the question becomes, so when we go to the store and she needs some help changing clothes, what do we do? Right? And I say, well, you can't expect the store clerk to change the person.
Right.
As the person with a disability, you can't expect the store clerk to come in and help you change.
Right.
But you could request a change in the policy temporarily, just for the two of you, that they allow you to take the merchandise into the family restroom, for example, if they have one, or just into the restroom, into the accessible stall. And so they have a policy that says you can't take merchandise in there. Well, let's do that just for you two, and everything's going to work out. But if you say, I expect them to help me change in the changing room, that's probably not going to happen.
Okay.
And so talking through possibilities
Right.
is one of the things we like to do.
I can't help but, this is a little bit on topic. There's a recent gym that my wife and I joined. Beautiful, gorgeous new gym in Charlotte. And two things I noticed, and it pertains to this. One is, in the hot tub of this gym, they have this lift chair.
Good.
Lifts you in and out. And I've noticed more and more new pools and hot tubs, these things exist. Is this required now through the Disabilities Act?
That's really astute. I'm glad you are seeing them, because yes, it is. Interestingly enough, the Americans with Disabilities Act was signed into law in 1990. It's been a lot longer ago than it can imagine. And there were some things that weren't covered. One of those things was swimming pools at hotels, at gyms and places like that, and schools. Okay. And in 2010, the Department of Justice and all of their experts under the Access Board, there's a group of experts, ergonomic experts, came up with some areas that had not been covered in the past. There was a set of them, not only swimming pools, but also miniature golf courses and big golf courses and fishing piers and amusement rides and children's environments. some of those things that just were not discussed back in 1990.
Right.
So they came up with some additional requirements for those areas. Not additional requirements for everything. A couple of other things were changed, but most of it was new stuff that nobody had ever addressed before.
Okay.
And that was one of them.
Really?
And they said that if you have something that's open to the public, then it's everybody or nobody.
Okay.
And so if you have a pool that's open to the public at a hotel or at a gym, then what do you do for those children who can't get in independently or the adults that can't get in independently? And so there are standards now, specifications, if you will, on what to do. Now, those rules were published in 2010, September 2010, for people to read through and get a sense of it because they're going to start to be enforceable in 18 months.
Really? Okay.
And so now they have been enforceable since March of 2012. And so if a person who has difficulty getting into the pool, may or may not use a wheelchair, calls up a hotel and says, we're coming to the hotel, we're staying for 3 days, we want to make sure that you have the lift, the answer has to be yes. Because no is a discrimination now.
Okay.
It wasn't prior to March of 2012, but it is now. Now you say, well, that's been almost, 6 years? Well, yeah, but there's parts of the 1990 piece that they haven't gotten right yet either.
Right.
But the answer is yes, and that creates some equivalency, some equal opportunity.
Okay.
One of the things we talk about is you can't be special and be equal. You have to pick. And so because we've had special education and special Olympics and special needs all these years, we have lost the concept of equality. And so I'm going to, under the sense of equality, I'm going to say you can get into the pool. Now, can you swim 12 laps? I don't know. I'm not guaranteeing you success. I'm guaranteeing you opportunity.
Right.
It's the same in the gym. If you were talking about the distance between the apparatus, the equipment. Mm-hmm. There are some Paralympians, which means Olympians with disabilities, who are paralyzed from the waist down, who can bench press like you would not believe. But how do they get to the bench? Mm-hmm. And so they can, now the law says there has to be enough room. They can roll up, transfer over onto the bench, and show us both up, probably. And so it's not guaranteeing success. It's just guaranteeing access.
Yeah.
And that's what we've done now with those kinds of things that you're talking about.
Well, on this same gym, I just happened to be taking a tour before we joined, and I asked one of the managers there, and I said, "Wow, I can't help but notice there's, 20 plus handicap spaces out front." Mm-hmm. And I said, "Are there that many handicapped people that come to a gym this size that you would need 20 handicap?" And he started to laugh. He says, "Actually, we do have a number of handicapped people that are coming to the gym already." He says, "But it really doesn't matter. We have to put in X number."
Right.
And I had no idea. Can you elaborate on that?
I can, if you'll allow me a moment to say,
yeah, please.
Let's don't say handicapped.
I apologize.
That's okay.
All right.
No, I just wanted to say that we like to turn things around to a positive and say accessible parking.
Okay.
Isn't that a better way of looking at it?
Yes.
Would you rather use the accessible door or the handicap door?
Yes.
Right. So we say accessible parking. But to your point,
okay.
There is, in the law, there is a formula of how many accessible spaces you have to have.
Okay.
You have to have one for every 25 spaces.
Okay.
All right. So you do the math and you figure out. Now, of those, so many have to be van accessible. You see that sign and you think, what does that mean? Well, the space itself has nothing to do with it. Every space is the same width.
Okay.
What makes it an accessible space is what's next to it. It's that striped rectangle that's on the ground next to it.
Okay.
If it is for a van, then that striped rectangle has to be the same width as the parking space. And that's really, really big. The reason for that is van accessible. If you're in a wheelchair and you are in a power wheelchair and you have a lift that goes down, it can't go down into the next guy's back seat.
Yeah.
So it goes out, and then you've still got room to maneuver. It takes up enough geography that you can get out and leave. That's the reason it's so wide. But if you just have a cane, or maybe you have a bad back, or for whatever other reason you have one of those hang tags, then you don't really need all that much real estate to get out, but you do need to have about 5 feet.
Right.
So you can open the door and get out. Otherwise, have you ever parked in a place where you get like this much space to get out? Mm-hmm. Well, that's hard enough for me to maneuver, but I don't have a condition that I need a little more space. And so for every 6 spaces that you have to have, one of them has to be van accessible, and that's for the people who have the power chairs and so forth. And while I'm on a roll, I'm going to talk about those placards, right?
Yeah.
So I see a lot of seniors will say to me, I don't have a disability, but I have a placard. And I say, well, then you can't do both. You can have a placard because you have limitation in walking. There's no embarrassment about that. You hang the thing up. But there are some things about having that placard that are responsible. The placard doesn't come with instructions. And I wish it did. Right. On the back, how to use. Because, for example, the placard belongs to the person, not the vehicle. So if, let's just say for sake of argument that you're my brother, you're my baby brother, and we go somewhere and you have the placard because you've had a hip replacement or because you use a cane or whatever, and I'm driving and we pull up and we've got the placard and we park in the accessible space, and then you say, you know what, I'm tired, you just run in and get what I need. Then I need to move. Yeah. Because that's only there for you to get out.
Right.
If you're not getting out, then we don't need to park there. And if I take your car and I have the placard, I don't get to park there because it belongs to the car. It belongs to you. So that's one thing people don't realize. And I get the question a lot. Mm-hmm. You can get a license tag, right, that has the symbol on it, which is the same as the placard. And so people are given a choice. Do you want the symbol or the placard, or do you want the parking license tag? And here's the problem with the license tag. First of all, if you are a disabled American veteran, thank you for your service, but having a DAV license tag does not give you permission to park in those spaces because it's not the state-issued accessible parking tag. Okay? So that's one thing.
Why would you get them then?
Well, the DMV. You get it in the same place. But just because it says disabled American veteran doesn't give you the right to park there. You need to have the license tag that says that. But here's the other problem. That placard has to be where somebody can see it.
Right.
So I have known a lot of folks who did have the right license tag, but they backed into the space and they got a ticket. Because if the placard's not showing, whoever it is assumes you don't have one. Nobody that I know, even with the best of intentions, is going to go around looking in the back to see if just in case maybe you have the tag in the back. They're just going to assume you're like everybody else and you just parked there for no good reason. And you get a ticket, and that's annoying. So I suggest to folks, you need to get the hang tag. Okay. You can get the license tag too, but you need the hang tag.
Well, it's also interchangeable between another car. If you
and that's another reason. Yeah. If it's just the tag, we always have to take your car. And if you're a person who can get in and out of my car, sometimes you will probably want to use my gas. Yeah. And that's a good thing. And don't park on those striped spaces, even a little bit. Because if you park on that striped space, you're preventing the next guy from getting out.
Let me ask you something. This has happened to my family recently. We pull up to a restaurant, and it's very crowded, the parking lot. So I was able to get a parking space. My wife had to circle 3 or 4 times, finally found a parking space. But as we're walking in, it's clearly there's no more parking spaces. And it just so happened a small van pulls up with 2 young women, probably in their late 20s, I'm guessing. They can't find a spot, so there was 2 handicapped spots up front. One was being used already. So they pulled into the handicapped spot, slip a handicap tag on the windshield, and hop out of the car and quickly walk inside, vanish into the restaurant.
Right.
In my opinion, there was no disability.
Okay.
I'm not one to judge, but have you ever seen the show, What Would You Do? Yes. So during dinner with my family, we talked about this issue and said, what should we do, if anything, and what is the right thing to do?
Okay.
I would like to hear your take on that.
Okay. I'm glad the first thing you said was that it's not yours to judge.
Right.
Yeah, that's a little bit questionable. If the point of having the tag is a mobility issue, right? So people who are deaf don't need the placard because it's not a mobility disability, just because you have a disability. But then you never know, right? It's possible that this is grandma's car or grandma's van, and they used it. And I have been in vehicles with folks who know what I do for a living and still try to use whatever placard is in the car if it belongs to somebody else. And I'm pretty ugly about that. Here's what I do in the situation that you were in, and it's something I can do that you can't do. When I see that happen, I will go up to the person who jumped out of the vehicle, and I'll hand them my card, because it says Disability Rights and Resources. And I say, I can see that you have a disability, and I would like to talk with you about that and what I can do to help you make sure that all of your rights are protected.
Yeah.
And sometimes I get, well, I don't have a disability. Well, you want to go move your vehicle? You know, that's one of the ways to do it. I tend to not accost people otherwise, and I assume that if you're that low, then you'll get your comeuppance somewhere.
That really was a topic because my mother-in-law is 94 years old, and she has
the placard. Okay.
And truly, truly needs it.
Yeah.
Walker, cane, well, mostly walker.
There you go.
But so we were like, well, what happens if she was coming here by herself and couldn't have a spot to park in? So my teenage boys were like very affronted by the fact that someone would dare to park in a space. And I was like, I don't know, you know.
Well, I'm really glad that you all had that conversation, because that is a conversation that needs to happen more often. Yeah. And people with disabilities need to know that don't let anybody use your placard.
Yeah.
Because you ought to be ashamed. One of the things that we've talked about is having a picture on the placard like there is for the driver's licenses.
You can do that?
No.
Oh.
Some states, but it's a state-issued placard, right? And so we have talked with the legislature, not a lot because we're bigger issues, about the possibility of having a picture on it, you know, and then does it match up? But they have bigger fish to fry too, so that hasn't happened. But I usually just give the person the benefit of the doubt, and I will go up and give them my card.
Right.
That's the other thing I do if I'm driving along and I stop at a stoplight and a person holds up a sign and says, I'm disabled, I need money. I hand them my card and I say, call me.
Yeah.
But, that may not be something that the general public has access to.
Right.
But I'm glad you all had that conversation. It's important to have that conversation.
Well, it is, especially as families, I think.
That's right.
Yeah. Well, tell me more about what your office does for seniors so we get a full understanding of the other services you offer.
Let me say again that disability is not necessarily an aging issue.
Right.
And so we work with anybody, any age, that has that limitation.
Correct.
If somebody calls and says, I'm 75 years old and I have this disability, well, the 75-year-old part didn't matter to me. It's the limitation.
Right.
You can talk to Area Agency on Aging if you have aging questions.
Okay.
But I would like for people to recognize that it's the limitation that we work with.
Not the age group.
Not the aging, right? Okay. Now, we do love working with seniors, and we do ask people their age so we can report to our funders the ages that we cover, but we cover 0 to gone. And so it doesn't matter the age, it's the limitation.
Right.
And so one of the common questions too that we get is folks move into an apartment complex or they buy a condo and now they need a rail on the front because there's 2 steps up. Right. Or they need handrails in the bathroom so they won't fall. And whose responsibility is that? And we talk to the owner, the manager, There are specific rules about that. It comes under fair housing. It's not under the Americans with Disabilities Act, but being protected is being protected. And so if you say, is that a violation of ADA? And I have to say, no, but it's a violation of fair housing, so let's move forward. And I can help you with that. I educate the person who has the disability and work with them so that we can get the manager or the whoever is responsible, the change maker, to make the change.
Right.
And one of the things about the agency is to be unnecessary. It's really hard to get, employees that way. When I say the goal of this agency is to be unnecessary. Now, I've been there 33 years and we're not making strides on that. But the point of that is I don't want people to depend on me. I want to empower you or teach you what you need to know so that you can go forward next time without me.
Right.
We always say that. That is in the back of my mind, is that I don't want you to think that I did it and you don't know what to do next time unless I do it.
Right.
It's not about us, it's about you. And it's always exciting when somebody rarely calls back and says, and something happened again and I handled it. I love those calls. Those are the best ones. But when people need our help, we're there for that too. And that's very important. We have so many dedicated employees with so much expertise. We work with young people with disabilities, and there's a lot of grandparents out there probably that are watching that may have custody or guardianship or whatever of a grandchild with a disability. Call us.
Yeah.
Because we're a big help when it comes to the schools too.
Yes, it's a big issue in the schools now, especially.
That's right. And we know all the schools in all 4 counties that we cover, the folks to talk to and how to make change.
Very, very important. Excellent information. I want to thank Julia Sain for being on the show tonight.
Thank you.
Executive Director of Disabilities Rights and Resources here in the Charlotte metro market.
Okay.
I'd like to thank her for being on the show. I'd like to thank all of our viewers tonight for tuning in. We'd like to welcome you to the next show of Aging with Attitude. Good evening.